All right, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. It's an educational channel, and we try to shed light on some great theories of everything, ancient and modern, mostly obscure, things that you probably haven't heard of, but if you had, they would literally change your life by broadening your perspective, um, kind of getting you to make a paradigm shift, awaken to 5D consciousness, help you with your formation of a holistic worldview, and help you out with your quest for better spiritual, mental, and physical health. So we look at grand unified theories, all-encompassing theories, earth-shattering discoveries, magnum opuses, and tour de forces from individuals and from groups. And today is our 194th video that we've done on a unit that's called the Reciprocal Church, which is many kind of obscure sources that I've compiled over the years that I feel have a spiritual component to them, and that could kind of all be put together in a kind of holistic way to kind of resurrect a spiritual nation that is going to be in kind of despair when they recognize that their holy book is a psyop, and that is fraud, and it gets discredited. It's already been discredited, both the New Testament and the Old Testament, but we just haven't kind of come to grips with it yet. Not enough people know about it. But I've been working on the New Testament here in the last many videos, decoding the New Testament, giving you kind of keys to help you decode. The basic gist of it is that the New Testament was written under the auspices of the Roman Caesars from 69 to 96 AD, the Flavian dynasty, which included Emperor Vespasian, his son Emperor Titus, and his brother, also Vespasian's son, Emperor Domitian. And the first two of those were also military generals that fought in what's known as the Jewish War between the Romans and the Jews in Palestine from 66 to 73 AD. And the Jews had been a colony of Rome, or province of Rome, for about 125 years. And just about the whole time, they were always a thorn in the side of the Romans. They're always insurrecting, revolting. They were very hard to deal with. The Romans had to enact special laws for the Jews that they didn't apply to other groups of people because of their chosen people, beliefs and their monotheism and their prohibition against graven images, and their jealous God who didn't want to hear about any other gods. And the Romans were actually quite tolerant of other religions, but they believed that you needed to salute, or at least give good lip service to worship of the Caesars, as well as your own religion. They literally had almost every day in the calendar was some kind of religious observance for them, because there were so many different nations or groups of people, tribes, whatever you want to call them, under the Roman Empire, and there were so many different religions, but they also wanted you to, salute Caesar, and the Jews refused to do that. So after the war, and probably before the war as well, but after the war, Vespasian, who was wounded in the war, and Titus, who was also wounded in the war, were the emperors, and they were living at Rome, and they decided to concoct a story that would hopefully mellow out the Jews, and it would also kind of pacify the Gentiles, the slaves, the soldiers, and really everybody. And so they enlisted a few Hellenistic Jews who had kind of gone over to the Roman side, or the Greek and Roman side, and they cooked up this gospel where the Jewish hero Jesus believed in rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's. He believed in turning the other cheek. He believed in carrying the Roman soldier's backpack an extra mile. And he believed that a Roman military commander has greater faith than every Jew in the land. And so these were blatant, the Gospels are very blatant in their kind of anti-Jewish and pro-Roman orientation, especially when compared with things like the Dead Sea Scrolls and other kind of apocryphal texts, and also the Old Testament. So it was a huge departure. And then that's just in the Gospels, but then when you get to the Paul epistles, the departure is even more stark. Now, the epistles are said to have been written earlier than the Gospels. Perhaps, perhaps not. Certainly, there's a lot of evidence out there that Paul was also a Roman agent. Robert Eisenman contends that Paul was actually a Herodian. He was of the family of the Herods, which were Roman puppet government in Palestine. And just judging from the letters of Paul, you just see just a gigantic departure from Jewishness and from a Jew. And whenever Paul, Eisenman is pointing out, whenever Paul talks about freedom from the law, he's not referring to freedom from the Roman law. He is referring to freedom from the Jewish law. Circumcision, kosher food, uncleanness, fornication, and that's what Paul is talking about and also the xenophobia. And whenever Paul is talking about obeying the law, he's talking about the Roman law. So these things have to be borne in mind when you look into the Gospels. We went over the last 4 or 5 videos, maybe 6 videos, Joseph Atwill's Flavian signature, about 30 some events that occur in the Gospels, the Gospel of Luke, and also in Josephus's War of the Jews. Now, the story of Josephus is very crucial because Josephus was a Jew born in 37 AD, and he was a priest, Jewish priest, but he was one of the military commanders for the Jews in this war against the Romans. But he was not too enthusiastic about it. He knew that they were going to lose, and he surrendered at a certain point. And also, he decided that God now favors the Romans instead of the Jews. And he defected to the Romans. He surrendered to Vespasian and gave Vespasian the star prophecy, which is reserved for only Jews. But in this case, he gave Vespasian the star prophecy, which said that I envision that one day you will become the new emperor. And lo and behold, after Nero died, there was this year of the four Caesars, Galba, Otho, and Vitellius, along with Nero, all died right away after, after Nero died. These other three became Caesars for very short periods, and finally the call came down to Vespasian to become the emperor. And when that happened, he rewarded Josephus by pardoning him from his prisoner of war status, by adopting him as a son and a member of the family, and by bringing him to Rome to live at the court of the Caesars and to be the court historian. And so Josephus wrote Wars of the Jews directly under the guidance of Emperor Vespasian and later Emperor Titus, and possibly also Emperor Domitian. He probably had some help, but if you go over if you read the two texts, War of the Jews and the Gospels at the same time, you will see all the parallels. And Atwell points out about 30 of them in a short passage of Luke, from Luke 5 until 15 or something like that. And, the basic theme, it's the parallels are conceptual. What Jesus has a 3-year ministry in Judea. Titus has a 3-year military campaign in Judea. Where Jesus goes, Titus goes, in that order. They go to the same places in the same order. And where they go, when they go to these places, they experience conceptually parallel events. Often it is that Jesus speaks in parables, metaphorically, symbolically, and prophesies events to come. And then those events are fulfilled, those prophecies are fulfilled literally, not figuratively. Jesus predicts them figuratively, but they are fulfilled literally. Now, the problem is, some Christians might say, oh, well, Jesus lived 40 years before Titus. And so, yes, Jesus really was prophesying the events. And they are fulfilled by Josephus. And many Christians did believe that. And as a result, Josephus' Wars of the Jews was actually part of the Bible for a very long time, up until the Middle Ages, for many different sects, and still is to this day for the preterist sect. But many of the other Christians realized that it was a double bind, because what Jesus was prophesying was the second coming, his second coming. And so Titus is actually the second coming of Jesus. What Jesus prophesies, Titus fulfills. We're sitting here waiting for reading the book of Revelation and waiting for the second coming of Jesus. It's already happened. It happened in the text of Wars of the Jews by Josephus that came out in the 70s AD at the same time as the Gospels. And, these are supposed to be histories. So it's very difficult when Titus fulfills something literally according to so-called history, and Jesus just makes a parable of it. That shows that Jesus really, the Gospels are dependent upon Josephus. So Atwill goes through parallel after parallel of them going to the same places and having parallel things. So, for example, the first place that they go, Jesus, even before the ministry starts, at the Sea of Galilee, Jesus meets up with Simon and Andrew and recruits them to be apostles. And he says, you're going to follow me, and I'm going to make you fishers of men. And then we flash to the wars of the Jews, and Titus and his men are fighting a bunch of Jews on the Sea of Galilee, and many of the Jews fall into the water, and the Romans have to harpoon them basically with their spears and their darts and lift them out of the water. So Titus's men are literally fishers of men. So Jesus is speaking metaphorically, but it is fulfilled literally by Titus, the second coming of Jesus. Also, Titus is literally a god because his father Domitian was deified by the Roman Senate. So Titus is literally the Son of God. When Titus dies, he gets deified as well by the Roman Senate. So Domitian is also a son of God because he's the son of Vespasian. He's the brother of God and the son of God, I guess. And so it's a little bit more complicated than that because it appears as if the Wars of the Jews is in 7 books, and I believe books 3 through 7 were written by Vespasian and or Titus, but then books 1 and 2 were added later by Domitian, and because the first 2 books are really they're precursors. They go all the way back to like 200 BC. When the War of the Jews is in 66 AD. And so it's not really, it's not really topical. It's just an introductory material, but he uses this to put in what is called the Flavian signature. And we're going to go over that. It's a term that Atwill uses, but it's also used, or at least literally fulfilled by Michael Menescot's, who has done an incredible amount of work. My hat's off to him because he's got this 114-page document on the internet, but it's like every single page is like worth 20 pages or something like that. There's so much information. It's very difficult. I mean, this is a difficult thing to collate these. And to find all the parallels, but he went through and he literally found thousands of parallels between Wars of the Jews and the Gospels. And in many cases, the Romans are mocking the Jews, and they are also mocking the Gentiles the Christians now. Who knows if how long the Romans thought that this little ruse was going to last. I don't think they thought it was going to be 2,000 years before somebody figured it out. And it wasn't, because there have been people in history, historical figures, very famous ones, who have figured this out and who talked about it, but they talked about it in a cryptic manner as well. And so that is a topic for later discussion. But, Joseph Atwill isn't the first person to figure this out. Some very smart people figured this out back in Elizabethan England, and probably many others as well. But what we're going to do today is we're going to start introducing this more complex and more comprehensive Flavian signature, which again is going to be dependent upon the book of Luke and Wars of the Jews. And I urge you to get some graph paper. Get some graph paper, and on the vertical axis, you put Book of Luke, verse 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way up to verse 24 at the top. Okay, and then on the horizontal axis, you graph out Wars of the Jews, starting at paragraph 0, which is in the preface, and it goes up to about paragraph 700, which is in book 7. You got to count the paragraphs. That makes it a little hard, but the whole thing doesn't have to be exact. You'll still get the gist of it if you're just approximate. But try the graph paper. So every time that we document a parallel, plot that point on your graph. And, you can judge it for yourself. Some of the parallels are totally obvious, but some of the parallels, you kind of have to be looking for them to find them. There's so many of them that they had to hide some of them just so that people didn't figure it out right away. And it's important to know that the Romans controlled the media at this point, and so the only texts that we really know anything about from the first century are the Gospels and Josephus's books, Wars of the Jews and Antiquities of the Jews, and his autobiography. Now, eventually in the mid-20th century, the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered outside of Jerusalem, and it took about 40 years for those to get online or whatever, but now people are able to kind of have a whole new understanding of what was going on in the first century because of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are we've talked about it quite a bit so far, but we'll be getting into it a lot more down here in the future as well. But just will mention that the Dead Sea Scrolls also do not mention Jesus. Josephus's Wars of the Jews does not mention Jesus either, although Josephus is the only first century voice, along with possibly Tacitus, who was also a Roman agent, to mention Jesus. But he does so in an offhanded comment that he makes called the, what's it called? The testimonium. And the testimonium is in between two paragraphs that are not related whatsoever. And so some people think that this was inserted after the fact because doesn't flow with the story. But Atwill argues that it's part of a triptych, kind of 3 successive paragraphs that you have to decode. But just to read you the testimonium, now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man, for he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as received the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles. He was the Christ. And when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men amongst us, had condemned him to the cross, those that loved him did not at first forsake him, for he appeared to them alive the 3rd day, as the divine prophets had foretold these and 10,000 other wonderful things concerning him. And the tribe of Christians so named from him are not extinct at this day. And he's writing this in the 90s, early 90s, 93 or so AD. So like 60 years after the events, minimum. But this is the only real extensive source, that extensive being a paragraph, that corroborates Jesus's existence. And it comes from a Roman agent who also wrote the War of the Jews. And if you read that, you see that it's all a mockery. And it's part of it's wartime propaganda, but it's also entertainment for the Roman court. Now, when we go through the experiment of graphing out the points every point that is a parallel. You can judge for yourself. Get, you know, a handful of different colors of ink, and you know, when the parallel is obvious and very strong, you know, put it in black ink. But when the parallel is what you consider to be weak, put it in some different color ink. When it's medium, put it in a different color, you know, and then we'll go through all the parallels from the book of Luke, and then we'll see what the graph looks like. And what you're going to see is you're going to see the Flavian signature. But we were not quite ready to start that right now. I think what we're going to try to do the next couple days is get a grip on Michael Menescot's, if that's how you pronounce his name, Menasgotz, and his kind of take on this, along with I think we're going to go through a little bit more of Joseph Atwill's approach as well before we get into the nuts and the bolts of the book of Luke. Now, we've gone through a lot of Luke already because of the Flavian signature, but the Flavian signature is like not even like 1/10 of the actual signature that results from Michael Menescot's expansion on Atwill's work. So let's listen to a little bit of his introduction, and we'll get into some more of his introduction tomorrow. It was the Flavian generals, Vespasian and his son Titus, who led the invasion of Judea in 66 AD after its rebellion over the taxes required by Rome, and who destroyed the heart of Judaism in 69 AD, the heart being Jerusalem with its holy temple, where they believed that God physically resided, where the Jews believed that God physically resided. Vespasian then gained the throne of the Roman Empire during that same year, 69 AD, and their government published a record of their victories called War of the Jews. Thanks to Joseph Atwill's bestseller, Caesar's Messiah, which I believe came out in 2005. He says 2000, but I believe it's 2005. It is known that the story of Jesus in Luke is a parody of the Flavian emperor's victories as told in War of the Jews. Whilst Atwill's evidence certainly suggests that Luke might be Roman government's propaganda, this paper contains evidence that enables us to prove it. Okay, he says, Vespasian had the means, motive, and opportunity to create Jesus' story. Okay, so this heading is the means. Having retaken Judea and become emperor of the Roman Empire, Vespasian was now an absolute dictator. He was in a position to instruct the Roman-controlled synagogues in Judea and elsewhere, which he did, and he did the exact same thing with the synagogues to create rabbinical Judaism as he did to create Christianity. So, you know, not only did he have the means, the motive, and opportunity, but he also had the method, you know, the MO. So it's MMO and MO. But so he was in a position to instruct the Roman-controlled synagogues in Judea and elsewhere of what narrative they should promote and what documents they should show the commoners. He didn't need to write the story himself. He would have ordered a large team of experts to be assembled and simply told them the outcome they must work towards and achieve. Opportunity. His son Titus had just destroyed Jerusalem, which the Jews believed to be the actual physical seat of God on earth. Wars of the Jews describes the systematic destruction being so total as to leave no sign of habitation, which is a pointed jibe aimed at the Jewish belief that God lived there. Clearly, the utter destruction of God's physical seat on earth would have undermined Jewish beliefs and left the Jews casting around for a new direction for their faith. Along with the death of the Jewish high priests, this gave Vespasian a window of opportunity where the Jews would be vulnerable to good news. Now, according to Atwill, gospel does not really mean good news, or more specifically, it means good news of military victory. The Gospels, good news of military victory, where the Jews would be vulnerable to good news of an extraordinary Messiah with divine prophetic and healing abilities. Also, Eisenman points out that Jesus' miracles, his healing, these are not Jewish things. Those are not like that kind of a healing stories are Hellenistic. They are Roman and Greek. They are not Jewish. So that also gives you an idea of who authored the Gospels. Vespasian's motives: retaining the throne, avoiding being killed like his predecessors, the four emperors who were all died the year before, and maintaining order, all of which was achievable if he could secure the total loyalty of the empire's peoples and soldiers. The 12 months prior to Vespasian's reign had seen 4 emperors killed in quick succession, so his priority was to avoid being the 5th. If not only the Jews, but also the commoners and slaves could somehow be made to be loyal to him, he would have a stronger grip on the throne, and if he could make the legions and Praetorian Guard undyingly loyal to him, he could prevent any coups or assassinations. Okay, we're going to stop right there. We'll take over at that spot tomorrow and go over a little bit more of this, and hopefully this will round out, and we will definitely be getting into the Book of Luke full decode with graph paper soon. Thanks for tuning in today.